Hello and welcome back to my YouTube channel. This is Julie and today I'm going to make 3 Christmas cards using untraditional colours. I'm going to be using pinks and blacks. The cards are fairly simple and I'm sure that you won't have any trouble making these cards yourself. You'll find that they will look quite different if you use different papers. I'm going to be using this DCWV Merry Bright paper that I bought, I can't remember where from, but I thought it would be a nice change for Christmas papers. And the cards that I'm making are 5 1/4 inches square, so I've cut some cream cardstock so that they are 5 1/4 by 10 1/2, and I have folded them down the middle to make my square cards. I don't really have a plan for the cards, but I have chosen 3 or 4 papers here and I'm going to start thinking about how I want to use them. Begin by cutting this first piece of cardstock 5 inches by 5 inches. You'll find that as I go through the process, because I haven't got a plan, I change my mind and I will trim this down to a smaller size. I take the paper and this Cuttlebug embossing folder, which is Christmas baubles, to my Big Shot and I emboss the piece of card. I use a Versacolour Old Rose ink pad to swipe across the embossed pattern to help it stand out. I take a second pattern paper and cut a piece that's 1 1/2 inches wide by 5 inches long. I then choose another pattern paper and cut a piece that is 2 inches wide by 5 inches long. I decided that I wanted the pattern papers to stand out more from each other, so I have cut some black cardstock so that it's got a 1/16 inch border all the way around each pattern paper. This is where I changed the size of the background paper. I changed that so that it would fit nicely onto the card with the black mat. I then decided to use some pink lace and I cut that to the same size, the 5 inches actually. I'm going to make the embellishment for this card, so I'm going to use this penny black stamp and I'm going to use the Christmas tree in the middle of the stamp. It's a clear stamp. I'm going to emboss it with my Zing black glitter finish embossing powder. I've got some off-cut cardstock from when I actually created the card bases, so I'm using my powder tool to give it a good coat because it has got a sheen to it and I find that they do have a bit of static electricity in them. I'm using Versamark clear embossing ink and I'm going to stamp that down and then apply my Zing black glitter finish embossing powder to it and heat it with my heat gun. Now that my embossing is finished, I'm going to trim it down and cut it into the shape of a tag. I'm going to use my crocodile and attach a gold eyelet to it so that I can thread some twine through it. My favourite twine to use is this 3-ply crochet cotton. I have it in white, as you can see, and I find that I can usually use ink or sprays or something to colour it if I want to match up a colour, so I always keep a nice ball of that handy. So I thread that through the eyelet and tie it at the top so that it won't come out. I then use that same ink pad, the Old Rose ink pad, and ink all of the papers. I've used double-sided tape to attach all of the pattern papers to the black mats, and now I'm going to use double-sided tape once again to attach them to the card base. I decide to use foam squares to attach the top layer, so that's the pink one that says fa la 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 la, so that it's got a bit of height. Time now to attach the embellishment we've just made. So half of that is stuck down with glue and half has foam squares under it so that it sits level on top of the centre section of the card. I have a sheet of assorted Christmas greetings that I've printed out on my printer, and I'm going to use one of those. I wanted it to be pinkish, so I used the same ink pad to just smear over the top of the greeting to colour it pink, and then I mat it on a piece of black cardstock and attach it to the front of the card at the bottom of the Christmas tree. I took one of the stamps from the Papercraft clear stamps called Christmas Greetings and stamped that on the inside of the card using the Stays on Jet Black ink. The stamp says, "'Tis the season to wish one another joy, love and peace. Merry Christmas." That brings us to our second card for today. This card was very quick to make. Using the same papers, I've chosen one pattern paper for the background, and I'm going to cut out some of these Christmas trees that I cannot remember what brand those Christmas trees are, the paper collection. I've had that paper, I would say, for a good 4 or 5 years, and it's just so handy to use these embellishments. But I fussy cut each of those Christmas trees. I'm going to cut this piece of paper 5 inches square. It's going to be my background. It's going to go on the same 5 1/4 by 5 1/4 cream card as the previous card base was. I cut a piece of this glitter organza to about 5 inches by 5 inches. It just fits nicely over the pattern paper. I decided I want my Christmas trees to stand out more from the background, so I went ahead and attached them to some of the offcuts from making the card bases with my glue, and then cut around them, leaving a very fine border. I did the same thing with all 3 of the Christmas trees. I used a black ink pad to ink around the Christmas trees and the pattern paper before I attached the pattern paper to the card base with some double-sided tape. I wanted my Christmas trees to have some dimension, and So I used some foam squares to attach the Christmas trees to the card base. I also used some liquid glue on the foam tape so that that would go through the mesh and hold the mesh in place, because I didn't want any adhesive to be showing through the mesh in parts where there wasn't something to cover the glue up. It was quite fiddly using the foam squares to fit around the tree, so I had to trim them up quite a bit to make sure that they didn't poke out beyond the tree when they were attached. I used some scribbles, which is very similar to stickles. It's from my ceramic days, and I just applied some, it's called gold, glittering silver, and I just applied that over the top of the silver baubles on the Christmas tree, just to give it some glittery effect. The greeting for this card comes from these Papercraft rub-ons. I've had them for ages once again. I've put all of my Christmas things into a box and put them away for the year, and only get them out every now and then, well, when I decide to make Christmas cards. So I have had them for a very long time, as I said. If you have not used rub-ons before, they can be a bit tricky. What I did was I put it over the top of some of the offcut from making the card base, and you rub the top of the rub-on. The ink is actually on the underside of the it's like a transparency. So you rub, and you have to make sure that you get all of the ink off. You can see through the transparency, and if you hold it in place, you can always test it and see that you've got it all. It can be a bit fiddly though. Once I've got the rub-on attached, I cut the greeting down to size and ink around the edge of it, and use some foam squares to attach that to the front of the card. That finishes off this simple but quite effective Christmas card. This next card that we're going to make, once again, is quite simple, but quite striking, I think. I am using this magnolia stamp. It's 3 trees. I don't know whether they're supposed to be Christmas trees or not, but I've decided to use them. I'm going to heat emboss them with gold embossing powder. So I stamp it down with my Versamark ink, and then use a Personal Stamp Exchange gold embossing powder. Once the heat embossing was set, I used my little scissors and fussy cut the trees out. I chose 2 of the pattern papers from the pad. I cut the lighter paper down to 5 inches by 5 inches, and then I wanted a darker pattern to go behind the light coloured Christmas trees, so I cut the black one down to 4 3/4 by 4 3/4. I treated each of the pattern papers with a distress tool around the edge of them all, and then I inked around it with a black ink as well. I used double-sided tape to attach the layers of paper to the card base. I used self-adhesive craft foam behind the Christmas trees and some liquid glue to attach the trees to the card front. By using the foam, it gives them some support and some height at the same time. The greeting for this card was another one from my computer generated greetings that I print out. I trimmed it down to the size I want, and then I matted it on 2 layers of paper in the same order as they are on the card. So I had the lighter pink against the darker background of the card. I used glue to attach the different layers of the greeting, and I also used my distress tool to distress the edges of the pattern papers. The greeting was then attached to the card using foam squares. As a final touch, and to add some interest and sparkle to the Christmas trees, I've used my scribbles once again, and this time I used one called Starlight Rose, which is a deep red, and I have just dabbed or left spots of it all over the Christmas trees to look like little Christmas tree lights. Every Christmas tree has to have a star at the top, so I used these gold star stickers to attach to the top of each tree. So I set that aside to dry, and this shot here you can actually see how much texture those little dots of scribbles give the card. I decided to add some pattern paper to the inside of the card, so I cut a piece of this pink paper to 5 inches by 5 inches and attached it to the inside of the card using double-sided tape. I inked the edges of the pattern paper before I attached it. I also stamped a greeting on the inside of the card using a stamp that I've had for a very long time. Once again, it's Thinking Stamps, and it's a greeting that says, "We wish you a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year," and it's in the shape of a Christmas tree. I've stamped that on using my Stays On ink. So there we have my 3 cards for today. 3 simple Christmas cards that are quite effective, I think, and I think they'd be very easy to make in any pattern paper that you liked. If you've enjoyed watching my video today, please share it with your friends, and if you would like to subscribe to my channel, I would really appreciate it. Thank you very much.